In the next couple of episodes, we're going to do some refactoring, but one of the side effects of test-driven development, which is what we've been practicing in this series, is that we've written the test, we know everything works, but we've not actually bothered to hook the UI up. So we've proved that it works, but we don't have the functionality in here to actually do it. So clicking edit a book doesn't work at the moment because we haven't hooked it up, but when we do, it'll work. So let's go ahead and make some changes here, and we're going to come over to the books edit page here and just hook this form up to make this work. So we know that we want to go through to, now that we've written our test, books / and then the book ID. So let's output the book ID in here, and we've got a post method here, but what we're after is a put method. We can use Laravel's helper here, method, and just say put, and that will go ahead and simulate a put request through to this endpoint. Okay, let's go over and check it out. Edit book, and there we go. It's been edited. We can't see anything because we didn't change anything, but let's say book 1 updated. Let's say author 1 updated, and there we go. We can see it works, and we can change the status of this. Let's change it to reading, and there it is under reading now. Okay, so at the moment our tests are all passing, but what we're going to do is refactor the authorization. And by that I mean over in the book edit test, we checked that it fails if the user doesn't own the book, and it should throw a 403. Now, if we come over to book edit controller, this is what we're doing at the moment, but let's change this over to use a policy instead. Remember, we're still going to need to access this in the context of a user so we can get that pivot information, but we can clear up this if statement without having to abort manually with a 403. So let's go ahead and create a policy. So PHP artisan make policy, and we're going to call this book policy. Let's open that policy up, and let's come down here, get rid of the constructor because we're not going to need that. And let's define out an action here that we can take on a book. And this is going to be update. This will apply to both the view here and the actual process of updating the book as well. So into this, we're going to get potentially a user and a book. And basically we want to check, can this user update this book? Let's pull the namespace in for book first of all. And this check is basically just going to be that the user's book relationship contains this book. So this returns a collection of the books that the user owns, and contains will just check that this is within it. Now we need to register this policy over in auth service provider. So let's come down here. We've got an example policy in here. We want to hook this book model up to this book policy, and then we can just start using this over in our controller. Let's just make sure that both of these are pulled in, and we should be good to refactor. So let's come over to our controller here, and we're going to say this authorize. We're going to pass in the action, which is update. That's the method that we defined. And we're going to say book. Now the user is implicit here, so the user will be passed in to our book policy. And of course, this check will return true or false. Now what we can do is get rid of this check here, and we can just relook the book up. So let's just grab this entire line here, put that there, and then that just hands this check off to a policy, which makes more sense. So let's rerun our tests, and there we go. It still passes. That was a successful refactor. Now we can do the same thing now over in our book put controller, and we can do this right at the top here, and we can get rid of this. Now we don't need this book in the context of a user. It's not required for this, and it's not required for this because we update this pivot in the context of a user anyway. So we can actually get rid of this entire chunk of code now to simplify things down. So let's go ahead and run our tests again, and sure enough that passes. Now because we've got a policy here before we validate, it really depends on what you want to do. What you could do is always authorize before you validate. That kind of makes sense because there's no point throwing back validation errors if the user doesn't own the book. So we can actually simplify our test down now. If we come over to our book put test, when we look at this test here, we don't actually need to pass this data down now, because at the point that we hit this, the authorization will kick in before the validation. So we can actually get rid of all of that now. And if we run our test, it's still going to pass. So there we go. Moving over our authorization, and we know that we've got our test to back up whether it works, they're still passing.